Tolkiens+World, A Marxist Analysis by John+Molyneux. John+Molyneux is a socialist, activist, and writer. He is a member of the Irish and British SWP. He formerly lectured at Portsmouth University, but now lives in Dublin. He writes mainly, but not exclusively, about Marxist theory and art. Beginning of article. The writings of J.R.R. Tolkien might seem a somewhat unusual subject for Marxist analysis, and indeed for me. I usually write about visual art or politics rather than literature, and when Marxists write about literature, they are more likely to focus on issues of method, or on figures from the canon of high culture, Shakespeare, Dickens, Tolstoy, etc., or modernism, Kafka, Joyce, Beckett, or with avowed radical politics, Gorky, Brecht, O'Casey, Steinbeck, etc. Tolkien fits none of these categories. Indeed, he is a writer to whom many Marxists would take an instant dislike, who some would decline to read altogether, as not serious literature, or who, if they did like him, they might be slightly shamefaced about it, almost as if they had a private taste for James Bond or Mills and Boon. For if Tolkien is not pulp fiction, he is not quite regarded as high culture either. Nevertheless, there already exists a small body of Marxist writing on Tolkien, including several articles in Historical Materialism Volume 10, Issue 4, Ishe Landa, Slaves of the Ring, Tolkien's Political Unconscious, Ben Watson, Fantasy and Judgment, Adorno, Tolkien, Burroughs, Carl Friedman, A Note on Marxism and Fantasy. Moreover, there is a serious justification for writing seriously about Tolkien, namely, his exceptional popularity and the need to account for that popularity. This popularity is truly extraordinary. According to Wikipedia, The Lord of the Rings, with 150 million sales worldwide, is the second best-selling novel of all time, after Dickens' Tale of Two Cities with 200 million, and the seventh best-selling book of any kind, after the Bible, Mao's Little Red Book, the Quran, the Chinese dictionary, etc. It has sold more than the Da Vinci Code and The Catcher in the Rye combined, 5 times as many as War and Peace, or 1984, or To Kill a Mockingbird, and 15 times as many as Catch-22. The Hobbit, with 100 million sales, comes in 4th among novels and 12th of all books. To this must be added the fact that The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, with takings of $1,119,110,941, was the 3rd highest grossing film of all time, after Avatar and Titanic, with The Lord of the Rings The Two Towers only slightly just behind. Footnote. I am well aware that citing Wikipedia is academically disproved of, but in this case it doesn't matter in the slightest whether these figures are exact, and I make no claim for their precise accuracy. They are merely indicative of the vast scale of Tolkien's popularity, and for this purpose Wikipedia seems perfectly adequate. End of footnote. Popularity on this scale means that the ideological content of this work is a factor of at least some significance in the consciousness of many millions of people, and thus worthy of analysis. Moreover, this popularity bears with it a conundrum. It is clear that Tolkien's worldview, in many respects, is right-wing and reactionary. But if this is the case, how come his work is so popular? Is it despite or because of this reactionary outlook? Or what is the relation between Tolkien's worldview and his audience? Investigating and hopefully resolving this puzzle is one of the main aims of this essay. It also throws up a number of interesting points about history, ideology, and art. When I refer to Tolkien's worldview, I mean not his personal political opinions, but his outlook as embodied in his novels. Although the personal opinions undoubtedly influence the outlook of the novels, it is the latter, not the former, that matters. The latter has influenced many, many millions. The former are known only to a tiny minority. Moreover, that worldview is expressed primarily not in the details of the plot of either The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, but in the overall vision of Middle-earth as an imagined society. The Lord of the Rings is not, in my opinion, an allegory. In this I concur with Tolkien, who is most insistent on this point in the foreword to the second edition. Unlike, say, Animal Farm, which is manifestly an allegory for the Russian Revolution and the rise of Stalin, the story of the War of the Rings does not correspond to, still less is it an elaborate code for, the First World War, or the Second World War, or any other actual historical episode. Footnote. Ishay Landa, in his aforementioned Slaves of the Ring, Tolkien's Political Unconscious, rejects the term allegory, but, in effect, argues that Tolkien's work is an allegory for, or at least a reflection of, quote, the crisis of capitalist property relations at the beginning of the 20th century, culminating in the First World War and the Bolshevik Revolution. Tolkien, he argues, was, quote, deeply aware of the calamitous consequences of imperialism, but at the same time was even more alarmed at the prospect of revolution. End quote. He sees the goblins, orcs, he quotes The Hobbit, as embodying, quote, Tolkien's underlying terror at the prospect of revolution, but also that, quote, the ring's essence is that of global expansion, of unlimited monopoly, of the unquenchable thirst for surplus value, and that, quote, the ring is capitalism, mythically grasped. I find this reading forced and unconvincing, but a detailed critique of it would take me too far from the main theme of this article. End footnote. The real history it most closely resembles is that of the Cold War, but we know that it was conceived long before the Cold War began. The plot of The Lord of the Rings, therefore, is largely sui generis. The social relations of Middle-earth, however, are not and could not be. It is very easy to imagine futuristic technology, intergalactic spaceships, Death Stars, transporter beams, and the like. And it is relatively easy to imagine strange, non-existent creatures, orcs, ents, insect people, cactuae, etc. But it is close to impossible to invent non-existent social relations, and the social relations of Middle-earth are readily recognizable. End of introduction.